kind of makes you an engineer. Um, and it's just like exceptionally valuable skill set. Then all you have to do is have someone recognize that you have this skill set, and you seem very hireable to me. Because not even all, I would say like a lot of engineers can even struggle with this. I think that you guys can all accomplish this, but like just having this skill set, I think like is very very valuable. Um, so we'll learn this with the Great Expectations code base. Like I said, we can move through some other code bases as well. But essentially, like yesterday, I spent like 3 hours kind of working on a single bug, which is not at all atypical. Like when as part of a dev team, we point stories, meaning we estimate how long it will take for a story to accomplish. The smallest stories are either 1 points, 2 points, or 3 points, or they could be five actually as well. A 1 point story is estimated to take about half a day. All right, so 4 hours for a pair for two engineers to work on. So that's the smallest story. Okay, 2 point story, which is kind of like average, is 1 day. It's basically like 1 day, and this is always like plus or minus, 30% or whatever. And then a 3 point story you would expect is like basically like 2 days, so it kind of doubles. And then a 5 point story is 3+ days. 3 days could be even a week. The bigger the stories get, the more uncertainty there is as well, right? Like that's kind of the risk of larger stories is, okay, you think it's this big, but when it's that big, it's pretty opaque. You don't really know what's going on, so it could be even larger of a story. So the point is like spending 4 hours on a bug that I wasn't able to solve or whatever is not at all atypical, especially considering I've never seen this code base before, know nothing, know very, very little about. I've never worked with Great Expectations. I know about it obviously, but I've never actually implemented it. So it's like, how do you kind of get familiar with something like this from scratch? The first thing I did was clone down the repo. There's a quick start in the documentation. I did not read it, but maybe I should have. Then I tried to just like, if you clone down the repo, let's see if I have it. GE. Okay.
They actually want you to fork it.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good idea. So this is a better idea. You can just click on fork, and then you can see that if you go to my Jigsaw Lab student, if you click on fork, it will create the repository automatically in your repo. So if you go to my Jigsaw Lab students, you can see I have a forked version. And the idea is, I'll make a commit and push directly to my version and then ask to get that merged into their repo. All right. So anyway, you can make a fork and then clone down from your repo. That way, if you look at this, let's see, Great Expectations, get remote -v, you can see this is pointing to my Jigsaw Lab student, right? Great Expectations repo. So if I push, right, it will go there. What we should do really is create a new branch, get checkout -b. I don't have this in the reading, but I should. And then what I like to do is, if you look at the issue, so the issue that I was going to work on was this uppercase issue. And then you can see each issue gets a number, 8619. Okay? So you can do something like get
That's
checkout -b 8619, or you somehow kind of want to reference this, and you'll say like core expectations break with uppercase. You could do like 8619. All right. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a new branch, right, called this. Why do I do that? Even though there's no risk I'm pushing to their code base, because like, let's say like I make some changes to the code along the way, I leave it in a broken state. I want to still be able to go back to the main branch, or in this case it's called develop, and know that that's clean. All right. So like good practice is to never code directly in the main branch, right? Keep that in working state. the other thing is now, like, I have a good, like, I know what this is about. Core expectations rake. So, okay, so we're on this branch. Get branch dash A. We can see that we're on this branch right here. And then you can kind of get going. The next, I moved through the, if you look at the code base, there is this core contributions, contribute a code change, and it tells you the steps for how to do this, right? Fork and clone the repository, we did this. Create a virtual environment, right? So it tells you how to do this. Install, upgrade pip. This is optional if you want to do it. Create an environment with Anaconda. Then do this. All right, run this version. You can see that if you need these other dependencies, arrow, secret, right, that you can add them in by having like the comma, Postgres, whatever Trino is, these other things. I did not. I just literally ran this. Okay. At that point, you're good to go. Like, you can scroll down to the bottom here, and it says this is optional, right? Redshift and Postgres. We're not doing that for right now. I don't know what that is. But anyway, all these steps are optional, is the point. Same thing, configure backends for testing. This is like with Docker. Let's just keep it simple. I don't think we need that. So we didn't need any of this, right? MySQL, same thing. Spark, right? So these are if you want to have it work with other code bases. I guess there's other plugins, but we're actually pretty good. One thing to pay attention to, though, down here, this is kind of interesting, is this like unit testing expectations, all right? And I just like scrolled down and kind of saw this, and I thought this kind of, like when you look at the issue that we'll be working with, let me scroll up for 1 second. The reason why let's go to this uppercase thing. It actually looked to me a little bit almost like these tests, which is why I started paying attention to this. Like, this is them setting up how you can see that the code is broken, and to me it started to look like this unit testing. Sorry, scroll down more. Here it is. It kind of looked like this. So I was like, that's interesting. All right. So this is how tests work. This is basically, remember, Great Expectations. What it does is it allows you to write tests on your data, okay? So for example, expect the maximum value to be between this number and that number, right? So let's say like we're doing like revenue, all right? We would expect the max value not to be, insanely high if whatever, we're some kind of business. Or maybe not to be too low either, right? Not to be negative. So this is, again, testing your data quality. But this actual unit testing expectations, right? So the idea is you run this function and it will check your data. But how do you know that this function is implemented properly? Well, there's this component, okay? So you have this dictionary, and you can see that you set it up with some test data. So this looks just like our Python tests, right? Where we have a setup, and then you run the function, and you check that it gave you the expected output. So this is like our setup of our data. And this is a column, and then these are the values of the data. This is our next column. These are the values, right? You can see we have some null. And then we have the schema, right? Defining in SQLite the data types for Postgres as well, I suppose. And then finally, here's the actual test. So up to here was the setup, define the schema, define the data. Down here is the test, meaning that if we run this function of, say, that the max value is between something, and then we provide the input to column, we're going to basically use this test to test column W, that the max value is between, or is between null and 4, right? So we're setting some parameters on how, much company revenue we bring in a year or whatever. Then let's say they run this with our test, they would expect to get a false value, and the reason why is because they observe 5. So let's just walk through that. If you look at the column W up here, you see this? Max value is actually 5, right? So if you run this test saying, hey, expected between 0, null, and 4, if it's implemented properly, it should say this breaks, right? It fails your data quality check because we're getting something too high for you, apparently. And the thing that's too high is this 5. So this is a good output, right? Because we're checking, we're saying, hey, expect the data between these two parameters, and it properly is telling us, nope, it's hitting 5. Does that make sense? And this is kind of, I guess you can suppress the test for SQLite, like to say, like, this actually won't work, maybe for SQLite or things like that. So then let's move on to the code base. Let's see. So I just did code dot, and if you look, let's do that again. Okay. So do code dot, we can see that we have these various components here, right? Docs, examples is like probably, use cases of great expectations. This looks pretty relevant, right? Great expectations. Like this is probably where the code is. One thing I did was, and this is borrowing from Sonia's idea, was just take this setup. Okay, this is the bug. We get a key error exception whenever the uppercase column names are used in expectation calls. So it's like I could just take this, copy it, and move it into a file called test.py, which is what I did. Okay, I don't even love the name of that. I would like it to be called something else, like uppercase test. That's better, maybe. I don't know. Okay. And then what do? We can run this Python 3 uppercase test.py and see, does this like spit out what they tell me it will. So he says, so what the issue that this guy claims is like, okay, these expectations, these tests of like expect our data maybe not to have any null values, whatever, this works fine when we just have like a column name like lowercase w, or I don't know what he gives, but it works fine with a lowercase column name, but it does not work for whatever reason if you uppercase it. Okay, so it's like, why not? That seems pretty brittle. So this is what we're trying to fix, and we ran it, right? So I just ran Python 3 test, uppercase test, and the other thing I did is you can look for, did this actually fail? And you can obviously see that it does. So notice, one thing that's interesting, do they all fail? This one succeeded, right? This one succeeded. So this is something interesting to pay attention to, because it's like, it's right, you want to keep this in the back of your mind, because it's like, well, why do some of these succeed? Why do these not? Because there might be a difference in the implementation, and maybe I can like learn from the ones that succeeded and copy that implementation or mimic it, right? Something like that. So that's like an idea, but I don't think we know enough I don't even know like how this stuff works at this point. So then we can kind of like start from here. Okay, so we did run this. We saw that these properly failed. We want these to fail because our goal is to get these to pass, and that's when we know our job is done. One thing I wanted to confirm before moving on was like there was a cause and effect here. All right, so by that I mean, I see that this stuff fails when we have this uppercase column name. But my question is still, if we lowercase this, will these now succeed? All right? He actually was checking the same thing when he did this happy path, right? These are all lowercase. But I wanted to just make sure. I don't understand this stuff well enough, so I just wanted to try it for myself. So I just deleted this, and I want to make sure that really the cause and effect was, that these things are upper. And that if I just make them lower again, they will pass. Everything will pass. And now we can see, right? Succeeded, 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 succeeded. Okay? So this seems to be a good test. Meaning, because this is uppercase, and a good explanation of what's going wrong. Right? When this is lowercase, we're all good. When we have an uppercase column, we are no longer good. All right? Let's just run it again. Make sure we're back to like our proper red. So this is the reason why I go through this is if I just dove in here and assumed that he was right and then he was not right, right, I'm going on a wild goose chase, right? So it's good to like a good, and he did some work for us by writing this test for us, but a good workflow for you guys is when you spot a bug, write the test, right, and make sure that it properly fails, right, and then you can go to turn it green, right? So this is in red state, and then it's your work to turn this green. All right. He also says you get a key error, which seems to be valid, right? We're getting this key error, so that seems to reproduce what he's talking about. What's next? Now it's time to try to understand this code. So these are the ones that are failing, these expectations, right? He said these are the happy path. These are all the lowercase column names. These are the uppercase ones that fail. And if you look at how this works, what happens is, and it's kind of confusing, he's kind of using some like meta programming, I guess, to execute this. He's using the get attribute function on a validator. I think we actually saw this before, but what's happening is it's like validator dot expect column names to not be null, and then pass through the keyword arguments are probably this. Okay? So this is a dictionary. We're unpacking these, right? Key value, right? So key value, expectation quarks. Looping through it, calling validator dot expectation, passing through the arguments. Okay? So it's just like he doesn't feel like, I guess, putting the dot notation, so he wrote some code to do it for him. And then he says, print it out if it succeeded, and print out the capture and display the error message if it failed. Okay? So I can't really, at this point, click on this to find it, but I can click on this guy. It seems to be basically the same thing, right? It's just passing through a different argument. So let's command click here. All right, so I'm just holding down command and we'll click. And the idea is I want to start to see, like I'm following breadcrumbs, right? To start to see how does this thing work? Specifically, what I'm trying to figure out is like in the back of my mind is where does this actually query the database, right? Because / the table, because we're looking, there's something going on wrong with the column. So if I kind of can see where that query occurs, then maybe I can, change it, whatever, and fix it. So, okay, we dive in. We see that this takes me to this get attribute thing. It's hard for me to read this a little bit. I can see this if name starts with expect, so that tells me this is probably the name of this thing. And then it says validate expectation. This seems relevant, right? The validate expectation, maybe this is executing MySQL. Let's click on this. So if it starts with that, then let's try to validate it. That takes me 3 lines down. And then we keep moving down. This is the name of the expectation being validated, returns the validation's expected result. The issue here is that this calls get expectation implementation of the name of the expectation. So this feels to me like it's just retrieving the implementation. If I command click on this, we can see that's what it's doing. This is basically like a dictionary, right? This is like a dictionary of all the expectations that are registered. And it's calling .get that expectation. But it's not, we have to remember like my end goal. My goal was to try to figure out how does this thing work and where does this thing actually get validated, like where does the query occur? And now it's taking me to this registry thing where I guess I'd have to somehow find this set of registered expectations. And you can see it is just a dictionary, but I still can't see a bunch of registered expectations. So this seems to be like a bad path to me, right? Because I'm doing this, the whole point was to click on this, trying to find the implementation of this, and now I'm down to some registry thing that has, doesn't actually show me where the code is written. So my sense is backtrack now. And this is I think this is the main this is a big part of just like navigating a large code base is you have an idea, you go down the path, and you just have to remember why you went down this path. It was to look for something, right? It was, in our case, is to look for how is this thing querying the database. We go down the path, we find a dead end, backtrack. Okay? So we found a dead end, now we need another idea. So, okay, so one thing potentially is to like read the documentation. All right, so that is like the next thing I did was you can go to like Great Expectations. I'm cheating here. Great Expectations documentation, right? And there's a bunch of stuff. The quick start. I probably should have read the quick start. In all honesty, I did not, but I wouldn't say that's a great best practice. Instead, I looked at this, create expectations, and it says how to create a custom expectation, because that seemed kind of interesting. This is also interesting, maybe, the expectation creation workflow, but then it's kind of confusing. Okay, so create a custom expectations. This is interesting. I don't know what this stuff is yet, but we could look around at that. The other thing I found, I don't remember exactly how, is there is an expectation registry, or expectation gallery. All right, I think it's right on the front page, where you can search for all these expectations. So what I did was I just plugged this thing. I was like, why don't we just search for this? And you can find this here. Okay, so I went down the first path, which was to like read the code, took me to a dead end. Back, he said, we need a new idea. Let's start reading the documentation. Found in the documentation, I found this, right? This is what I was looking for, which is how does this thing work? And it gave me like a clue, which is, it says this core expectation. This is really the main thing that shouted out to me. Why? Well, it looks like code, right? It's camel case. Sorry, let's go back. It's camel case. It looks like a class to me, right? And it looks like this is maybe where this is an expectation type. So maybe I can find where this is. Core column map expectation. A typical pattern, what I first did, a typical pattern is to look for it using snake case, right? It's column, whatever this is called. Camel case for the class, snake case for the file name. So let's do that. Let's undo. So Command P to look for the file. Column, do it again. Column map expectation. Okay. This may look good, but we have to look at what folder it's in. So this is in the examples folder. Probably not what I'm looking for, right? This is like an example of it or a template, but not the actual implementation of it. This looks better. Set base, not exactly right, but looks better. This is a set base expectation. This is regex based, and it's in the main, what looks like where these things are actually implemented. Notice everything else is not. Examples, tests, docs. All right. So the next thing I did was I like clicked on these, and I'm like, oh, maybe this is interesting. Let's do this. Let's look at the next one. I think it was the regex based one. And I started kind of looking through this, but then I also, while I was looking through this, I noticed this folder over here, which is core, okay? So I was like, this looks relevant, right? Why? Because if you look over here, it says core column map expectation. I also remembered from reading his issue, in the issue, it actually did say the word core. It said something like some of the core tests are failing, which I did not know was a special word, but sorry, it's in here. The core. Here we go. Multiple core expectations don't work, right? So now he's probably talking about stuff in here, right? In expectations. So you can look at this, and now this looks like very relevant. Let's see if our specific expectation is in there. So that is this expect column values to be null. Here it is. Okay? So again, why are we going down this? Like, you have to keep. The reason why I keep repeating this is because I've worked with developers who like lose track as to why we are doing the thing we are doing. Why are we doing this? We want to figure out how does this expectation actually query the column. Once we like can't do that, it looks like this is a dead end. We have to backtrack again. Okay, but so far this looks okay. We can look at this. I basically, I don't know enough about any of this to make sense of it yet. I can kind of like guess, but that's about it. So these are all just, imports. This is our class. Expect column values to be null. It is of this type column map expectation, right? And you can see, like, I don't, we could start reading this stuff. I think maybe I did, or at least look at the column name. But I really am looking for the functions. I'm looking at the function names. So validate configuration looks okay. It's probably validating literally the configuration, meaning the setup, and not actually the data. Prescriptive template. What's a template in like programming? It means like displaying stuff, right? We saw that in Flask, right? So this is probably displaying the output, maybe. You can see, right, renderer, like render, a page, right? So again, like, and then this is the text. So this is almost reminds you of like model view controller. This is like the view, that they spit back to us, telling us like, whether this passed or failed. Again, like more renderer. This is interesting because we'll see this later. This evaluation thing seems kind of interesting, but I still don't see anywhere that is querying the database. The only thing that maybe stands out to me is this, right? Just because it's like Pandas engine, right? Engine feels it has like database engine, but still not great. So again, what am I doing? I'm scanning for functions that look relevant. The validation dependencies, this looks actually pretty interesting. I don't know that I saw this properly the first time. Get the validation dependencies, configuration, execution engine, runtime configuration, right? This starts to feel like this might be setting up at least to query the database. And then this is what's most promising probably out of the box, is this validate function. Get the result format, get success arguments. This mostly thing, you can Google it, but it's like in Great Expectations, apparently it's like if there's some sort of threshold that say most of the data is not null, for example, it can still pass, right? But this looks probably most relevant to me, right? It's called the word validate, and this whole thing is about validating. So what you could do at this point is put a breakpoint and see, like, does it hit the breakpoint? Notice when I put a break, right? So I looked through the file, right? We found a file that seems very relevant. Then we are scanning through the file to find the function that's most relevant. To see if it's actually useful, you want to put the breakpoint immediately below, at the very first line where the function begins. Why? Because what if if you put it down here and it never gets to this line, right? Like you're not going to know. Or if there's like an if-else statement and you put in the wrong branch of the if-else statement, it's going to look like it never hits it. So we just want to be like, does this thing hit this at all? And now what do? I run the test and see, does this somehow go through this path to hit the validate function? And it does. Validate line 241. Don't worry, we're not close. The next step is to look through. What I recommend doing is look through each one of these components, right? Like, what does this function depend on? Configuration, metrics, runtime configuration, execution engine. Which one of these probably looks most relevant to me? These three, I guess? I don't know. Like, the execution engine is the database, probably. Maybe this and maybe this, right? Probably metrics looks most, but let's look at configuration first. Okay. Expectation type, right? Expect values to be null. This is what we pass through the function. Not too much. This is like everything looks what I would expect, but nothing here looks so good, or looks super relevant. Metrics. Let's look at this next. Okay. here's what threw me off about this, what made me suspicious, like thinking I'm down the wrong path, is we can see this table row count is 0. It made me feel like it's already queried the database at this point. I might be wrong about that, but it made me think if I'm trying to look for where are we querying the database, and now it feels like, have we already queried the database at this point? Like, have we already gone to my thing and looked for unexpected values and see that there's no rows? I mean, I'm not sure, but that made me kind of, suspicious that maybe I'm in the wrong function. Other things I did next was I kind of like got to the end of this, right? Eventually you get to the end of this, and I still don't feel like I have a very good understanding, right? We looked at these main components, which is metrics, runtime configuration, and this stuff. Nothing super relevant. I don't see where this thing is actually executed. So what can we do? Kind of have to backtrack a little bit, and that is because, well, this one we can reread this, right? It tells us mostly is right the fraction of values that match the expectation, but this, right? This is of type column map expectation. So in my brain is, all right, maybe it's not implemented in the actual class, but maybe it's implemented in the parent class. So to do that, we can command click on this, and then go here. All right, so it's like guess, and then kind of like, doesn't seem like it's there. We need to backtrack. All right, column map expectation. You can read through this, scroll through it. I don't know what this stuff means, and you can look at it, right? These validate configuration, get validation dependency. So these are similar functions, right, that we saw over here, validate configuration. We also saw here, right? This is called like the template pattern, by the way. What this means is if this function's not implemented, it will fall back on this one, right? So that's why I'm looking at the parent class to be like, maybe something's not implemented in this expect column values to be null, but maybe instead it's implemented here. And really what I'm looking for is to find like some equivalent of like a run function where I can see like an order of operations where it's like, first it does this, then it does this, then it does that. That would be great. I never found it, but we have to look. All right. So, okay, so we can start at the beginning here. These things here, by the way, is this is defining kind of what you can init with, right? The map metric is of this type. Domain keys are of these. Look like these. Let's not spend too much time on that. So again, just scanning through, this actually get validation dependency seems close, but doesn't seem like it's actually validating anything. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know. This is a lot of code. And then here again, the validate is probably what I look most carefully at. I ended up not really being able to understand this. So, and this was after looking at this class here, and then, right, and then I looked at this class, felt okay, I kind of understand, but not really. And then it's like, maybe I can look for a run function in batch expectation, right, into its superclass. And I didn't find like a run function really there either. So what about, and I shouldn't say superclass, its parent class. What about its parent class, this expectation class? Okay, this thing got a little bit better because it has this init function, which is a lifecycle thing, right? So remember, when I init any of these guys, it seems like it's first going to call validate configuration, which makes this thing seem important. But then when I look through it, again, it just validates the actual configuration, not the validation itself. All right. So again, like I keep going back to this validate function, but it was not. I couldn't really find too much logic here of actually hitting the database. Okay. So at this point, let's think about what we did so far. Let's share my screen. So it's like, one, we like start from the test down to reading the code, hit a dead end. Two, documentation led us to like a closer piece of the code, the expect to be null. Hit a dead end. We kind of. Like maybe we can spend more time on it. So like, so this was kind of like reading the code again. And now it's like 3, like maybe I can go back to the documentation. Okay? This really is what I started thinking, because when I looked back, if you look back at this code, expect column values to be null, you can see it tells us this is a type of column map expectation. And look at the documentation here. So let's go here. How to create custom column map expectations. Then I read through this, and it says, it is pretty useful because it tells me, this will show me how to create a custom column map expectation, which is what an expect column values to be null is. So what's nice about this is it has a template. It says you can find the template file for column map expectation here. So you can click on this, and now it's like I can start to understand condition metric name. This is the ID string used to reference your metric. So condition metric name should be probably somewhere in my implementation in this expect column values to be null. And it's here, map metric, oh shit, hold on. Condition, I don't know if they have it. They do have like map metric and other ones. So you can see like this is good because it, like these different components tell you, can explain this example, this implementation of a type of, what is it called? Column map expectation, right? So this is an implementation of column map expectation. It's telling you the pieces you need, and then this is telling me what each of those pieces does. Here's what I really noticed. This method implements the core logic for the Pandas execution engine. This method implements the business logic for evaluating your metric when using SQL Alchemy. This method is for Spark, okay? So each of these, apparently, is where the business logic should live, all right? So now this seems quite relevant. Not only that, but if we go to that documentation file on, it was this, on creating a custom column map, it tells us, if you look for business logic, it says, this is the stage where you implement your actual business knowledge. It should be here, column conditional partial. So then we look for it in the file. Does it exist in this actual implementation? And it does not, which is crazy. So I'm like, at that point I think maybe it's lying. Is this not up to date? But no, a lot of other files are doing it this way. Okay? So there's a question, which is like, why is ours not doing it this way? But, you know, like, and we could probably look at these others to figure out why not. The other thing you can do is, so basically here's about where I left off, which may feel frustrating, but I feel like we're kind of close. So we should be looking for something like this. The other thing that I found is that this metric, a lot of them are implemented with like a metric component, and that's where the same business logic lives. But if you look at these things, this is where like the logic, right, for querying, I can show you another example, is actually, it seems like is actually called. So this is basically what we're looking for. And the next steps that I would do is to look for other implementations. I can send you a couple, like other implementations of like a great expectation, of these expectations, to see how they're implemented, because now we can kind of understand where this logic is implemented. Or like, you know, maybe like it's being imported somewhere. Either it could be being imported somewhere from here that we're not picking up on, or it could also be like in a parent class. That's about where I am. So it may feel like, you know, we're nowhere, but that's not true. Like, we learned a lot about where like where, just even finding this file, and then what to expect from here. And then we know kind of here's all these other implementations of expectations that we can look at and begin to see how they're querying the database, even if we don't see this one. And then finally, in the test, probably the next thing to do is like in the test itself, or just remember there are all these other, ones that we can look at, right, to see how they're working. Yes, Sonia?
So I did find a solution to this one, and you could just explain kind of the one step I did beyond what you just did, because I did
Sure.
all that. Believe me, I
Great.
did all that.
Okay, cool.
The next step I did was I simplified the test, because after reading the documentation, you learn that what he's doing is he's setting it up like a normal person would be doing. He's like, okay, I'm creating a suite. So like what you just did there, highlighted. Generally, you create a bunch, like you're saying, a database of expectations, but you don't have to. You can have one expectation. All I want to do is look at the first one that's failing. So I got rid of all of this. I got rid of, because every time I ran down these rabbit holes, I kept running into quarks. Because the value is what we care about, not the argument. And everything is set with quarks, so you can't modify a quark because quarks don't really exist. They don't have to. They're optional in all of these. So I got rid of everything that was dictionary, and I just created a single expectation. And it stopped going through things like batch, but it still had the error. So now you can just look at one error at a time, very, very simplified, just as a single string.
Mm-hmm.
And then it took me somewhere else that I couldn't get to because I kept getting stuck in that batch loop and all that other crap in the validators. So it actually ends up being a lot different, like at least the one I found, and it's in the pull request if you wanted to see. It was a single line once I got to it.
Okay. Yeah, let's take a look at that. I want to understand it a little bit better first. But I do want to just kind of talk to you guys through the broader approach of just how we navigated a large code base, right? It's set up our test. Luckily, they provided us one. Run it. When we thought that we were in the correct spot, right? Put a breakpoint to make sure we're at least hitting it. That doesn't mean that we're there. It just means it's a good check to see, are we way off, right? If we're not hitting it, it's probably not relevant. If we are hitting it, it may be relevant, right? Then, we read through it. We tried to understand, see where it's going wrong. We could not still figure out that validate method. Eventually, we looked at the parent classes. They did not really help us. We went back to the documentation, right? That took us further closer. So you just keep building your understanding until you kind of get closer and closer. What we ended up with was actually seeing where the business logic should be implemented and getting closer to that. And what this told me is there's this pattern of how to implement the business logic, and we have a lot of expectations that we can look at for examples. So that's where my next step would be, But again, this is my limited understanding, but I do feel like in a few hours, we did gain, or at least I did gain a good amount of understanding. It just is a long, it takes time, and it's expected to. So I have readings on this, but before I do, it kind of walks you through this. I recommend go through this because I think it will really help you just internalize this process. But before I do, questions about, I don't know, the approach or hypotheses we have or whatever. No? Okay.